and welcome to this overview and training on the Clinical Competency Inventory, also known as the CCI. This session is designed for both cooperating teachers and clinical supervisors. Thank you for your time, commitment, and guidance to our clinical interns in helping them prepare for their careers. A few notes before we get started. You can pause this presentation at any time if you need a break, take notes, or want to read the slides to review information. We strongly recommend having a hard copy of the CCI instrument in front of you during this presentation. A copy of the CCI can be found on the SOE repository, but please note that you will be completing a digital CCI via Qualtrics. Having a hard copy nearby during this presentation will allow you to review and read the standards and indicators as written in the CCI, as well as provide you a place to take any notes. This presentation should last about 35 minutes. You will be asked to complete an assessment after viewing this video. The assessment will be shared by the Director of Internships and Assessments. Let's take a minute to look at what we are going to review today. The goals of this presentation include to learn about the CCI and learn how clinical supervisors and cooperating teachers can implement key factors, review the 4-point evaluation scale used for observation and feedback, review the standards and competencies included in the CCI, and provide contact information and next steps. First, we are going to discuss the Clinical Competency Inventory, its development, and how it is used by supervisors and cooperating teachers. The CCI instrument provides cooperating teachers and clinical supervisors the opportunity to observe the same lessons if possible and ability to provide constructive, critical feedback to the clinical intern at the same time on the same competencies. This evaluation is cumulative because if the competencies are not specifically viewed in an observation, other evidence may be provided and referenced. At the first visit of Clinical Practice 2, the clinical supervisor will review the observation form and the CCI with the cooperating teacher and clinical intern. This is a great opportunity to provide feedback from Clinical Practice 1 and review goals for Clinical Practice 2. At the midterm, which is the fourth observation, the clinical supervisor and cooperating teacher will fill in the CCI independently after observing the same lesson. The clinical supervisor will hold a midpoint conference following the fourth observation with the clinical intern to review the CCI. The cooperating teacher will join this conference to discuss the midpoint assessment when possible. If not possible, the clinical supervisor should provide a written follow-up on the conference and be sure to send it to the clinical intern and cooperating teacher, so all three are aware of the expectations and goals for the second half of Clinical Practice 2. The clinical intern should be informed of competencies that they did not meet, so they can provide evidence in these areas by the final. The goals of this midterm conference include an opportunity for the clinical intern to reflect on their lesson, discussion of the clinical intern's areas of growth, and identification of strengths, and importantly, identification of areas where a standard was not observed, which allows the intern the chance to provide evidence by the final observation. At the completion of Clinical Practice 2, the clinical supervisor and cooperating teacher observe the same lesson. They then fill out the CCI independently and enter the final assessment. Ratings between the cooperating teacher and the clinical supervisor do not need to be in complete agreement. However, if both the supervisor and cooperating teacher have participated in the session, worked closely with the clinical intern and each other throughout the year, and reviews the criteria for each indicator on the CCI, there should be a very high inter-rater reliability between the supervisor and cooperating teacher evaluation scores. Please note the CCI is only administered at the midterm and final. The CCI instrument provides the clinical intern feedback that will enable them to move toward proficient and advanced proficient, ability to self-reflect on clinical practice against same standards and competencies, and at the completion of clinical practice 2, the clinical intern will do a self-assessment and also fill in the CCI to assist with alignment between the clinical supervisor, cooperating teacher, and clinical intern. This concludes our review of the instrument as a whole and the use of the CCI. If you want to go back and review any of the information, you may do so at this time. We are now going to move on to discuss the 4-point evaluation scale. The 4-point scale, consisting of ratings advanced, proficient, proficient, novice, emergent, offers cooperating teachers and clinical supervisors an opportunity to show a clinical intern's growth over time. At the midterm, scores are likely to be lower than at the final evaluation. We are looking for growth and development of the clinical intern's competencies over the course of the semester. Many clinical interns may be at the novice stage in some competencies, but will become proficient or even advanced proficient by the semester's end. We do not expect our clinical interns to have consistently high ratings of advanced proficient by the midterm, though some may achieve that by semester's end. Let's take a closer look at the 4 ratings. The clinical intern with an advanced proficient rating shows exemplary practice. Clinical interns may be rated advanced proficient in a given competency if they consistently demonstrate all the skills and behaviors listed and/or evidence required for each competency outlined in advanced proficient for a specific indicator on the CCI. In the rating scale at the end of the CCI, advanced proficient should only be used if the clinical intern consistently demonstrates exemplary practices in all areas, including integrating content knowledge with application, lesson planning and implementation of daily instruction, organizational and classroom management, using assessment to inform instruction, and adapting instruction to meet the needs of all learners. As a frame of reference, the rating scale for advanced proficient is 3.5 to 4. Now, we're going to move on to proficient. The difference between advanced proficient and proficient is in the level of mastery. A rating of proficient indicates basic competence. Proficient interns show most of the skills and behaviors of a competency and/or evidence required for the criteria outlined in advanced proficient for a specific indicator on the CCI. Please note the intern may not have displayed or mastered some subcategories. The clinical intern shows basic competence in integrating content knowledge with application, lesson planning and implementation of daily instruction, organizational and classroom management skills, using assessment to inform instruction, and adapting instruction to meet the needs of all children. The rating scale for proficient is 2.75 to 3.4. Many clinical interns will begin their practicum at the level of a novice, indicating limited competence. A novice may demonstrate some of the skills and behaviors listed under a competency, but still needs mentoring and assistance to reach levels of proficiency. Areas in need of improvement may include any of the indicators within a given competency. Over the course of the semester, the objective is to guide clinical interns toward proficiency and advanced proficiency. At the midterm, some clinical interns may still be novices in one or more categories. Focus on these areas in your debriefing with the clinical intern, since these areas will need to rise to proficient level by the semester's end. The rating scale for novice is 1.5 to 2.74. A rating of emergent suggests the clinical intern exhibits difficulty meeting the competency. The intern has exhibited few of the skills and behaviors listed for the competencies outlined in advanced proficient for a specific indicator on the CCI. It should be viewed as designating an area in serious need of improvement. The intern may have problems in several areas. At the midterm, if a rating of emergent is given in the overall rating of the CCI or in several competencies or demonstrates serious shortfalls, then a clinical placement alert form should be provided to the Director of Internships and Assessments. You can complete a clinical placement alert form by visiting the SOE repository. There is a live link and QR code that will bring you to the form. The cooperating teacher and clinical supervisor will work with the director to initiate a plan for remediation so the clinical intern has an opportunity to show growth before the end of the semester. Please note that in completing an alert notification, clinical interns should already be aware of areas of concern. Communication, remediation plans, and clear objectives should have been discussed. A clinical placement alert indicates there has been no progress by the midpoint of the semester and additional intervention is needed to help the clinical intern. At the final evaluation, this rating is only used to indicate that the clinical intern has not successfully passed his or her clinical practice experience. The rating scale for emergent is 0 to 1.4. Observed rating is only available for use on midterm evaluations. The CCI evaluation final must have a score of either emergent, novice, proficient, or advanced proficient for every indicator. A clinical intern needs to have demonstrated some level of skill in each competency at the final. If you did not observe a specific indicator in the classroom at the midterm, additional evidence from the clinical intern is required in that area by the final. As mentioned earlier, the midpoint conference and feedback provided by the clinical supervisor and cooperating teacher should clearly identify the areas where a clinical intern needs to provide additional evidence. If you have a question or a reservation about an indicator, please provide a specific comment explaining your concerns within the evaluation. To further elaborate on the clinical placement alert form, at midterm, if you need to complete a form, please do so using the link found in the SOE repository. After the form is completed, you will be contacted by a member of the Felician University School of Ed team to initiate a plan for remediation. A conference may be requested at this time. During this critical time of the semester, you will be asked to elaborate on indicators of concern, share any specific incidents which are reason for your concern, and together we'll brainstorm thoughts and recommendations for a remediation plan. As referenced earlier in this presentation, at the final assessment, a rating must be entered for each of the 34 indicators. An evaluator does not have the option of using not observed on the final CCI. The following scale may help you to assess the clinical intern. This scale will not be accurate if any indicator is not scored or if an indicator is identified as not observed. Advanced proficient equals 136 points, proficient equals 102 points, novice equals 68 points, and emergent equals 34 points. A teacher candidate needs 102 points or a 3.0 average on his or her final CCI to be recommended for certification. These point totals reflect the total points possible if every indicator was evaluated at that level. For example, a clinical intern receiving advanced proficient on every indicator would earn a total of 136 points. It is important to note that this is an average of a 3.0 or a total of 102 points that the clinical intern must earn on the final in order to be recommended for licensure. Clinical interns who receive a novice rating in one or more areas must be advanced proficient in others. If you have any questions regarding the rating scale, please take a minute now to write them down. Following the training, we encourage you to contact the director for clarification and guidance. At this point, we have concluded the review of the 4-scale scoring: emergent, novice, proficient, and advanced proficient. We have also discussed the use of not observed. Should you want to review any of this information, you have the opportunity to go back and do so now. We are going to now take a closer look at the standards and competencies within the CCI. As a review, the CCI has 11 standards as aligned to InTask standards and the New Jersey Professional Standards for Teachers. Within those 11 standards, there are a total of 34 individual indicators to help evaluate a clinical intern's knowledge and skills. This slide identifies the domains for assessment, the learner and learning content knowledge, instructional practice, and professional responsibility. There are standards aligned to each of these domains. The CCI follows the New Jersey Professional Standards for Teachers and has 11 standards. As seasoned educators and education professionals, these domains and standards are likely very familiar to you. The next several slides will take a closer look at each of the 11 standards and review the specific areas of development and focus for a clinical intern within that standard. Standard 1 on learner development addresses the clinical intern's awareness of child and adolescent growth and development. The clinical intern demonstrates recognition of varying patterns of learning and development, and then uses this understanding when designing and teaching lessons. These lessons should be developmentally appropriate and challenging for the students in the classroom. Furthermore, the clinical intern's interactions should show sensitivity to cognitive, linguistic, social, emotional, and physical differences. Please note that in the bottom corner for each of the standards, you will see the specific correlating indicators on the CCI for that standard. For example, the learner development, there are two specific indicators, 1.1 and 1.2, that help to evaluate the clinical intern's knowledge and skills pertaining to learner development. If you have a hard copy of the CCI in front of you and you want to take a closer look at indicators 1.1 and 1.2, please pause this presentation to do so. Simply choose play again when you're ready to move on to Standard 2. Please feel free to pause and play the presentation following each of the next 10 slides and standards, if you find it helpful to review the indicators more closely. Standard 2 builds on the foundation of Standard 1, but specifically addresses the clinical intern's grasp of individual differences, diverse cultures, diverse communities, and the role diversity plays in teaching and learning. Included in this standard is the importance of designing and developing inclusive classrooms in which all students have access to success. Specifically, individual differences are respected and individual needs are met. Clinical interns who score well in this competency incorporate multicultural content and perspectives into the lesson. There is the use of appropriate materials that reflect an equitable portrayal of diversity. Indicator 2.2 focuses on multicultural content and perspective. This can sometimes be a challenging indicator to evaluate. Some examples of how a clinical intern can demonstrate their competency in this area are: the intern uses multicultural literature, text, art, and/or media that represents diversity of peoples, cultures, beliefs, and perspectives. If the supervisor does not observe the intern during a lesson that involves the use of multicultural content, the intern may provide evidence of such through lesson plans created and implemented at other times during clinical practice. Indicator 2.3 requires that the clinical intern also implement strategies to support learners whose first language is not English. In addition, they demonstrate the ability to plan and instruct for all learners in the classroom, including those with an IEP, 504, or other accommodations in the classroom. If there are no ELL learners in the classroom, this may be a competency or indicator that could be marked not observed at the midterm evaluation. However, this standard can be demonstrated with other evidence at the final. Some examples might be providing lesson plans that articulate accommodations even if not delivered, visiting an ESL classroom in the school and working with the teacher in that room for a bit, researching and discussing useful links and resources available to educators with regard to teaching the ELs. You should use the comment section for this standard or appropriate indicator to explain the composition of the classroom and other evidence for clinical interns' ability to demonstrate this competency. Again, if you want to take a closer look at indicators 2.1, 2.2, or 2.3, now is the time to do so. Under Standard 3, the clinical intern collaborates with cooperating teacher, colleagues, learners, and families to create a positive classroom environment. The intern encourages collaborative student learning, positive social interactions, and actively engages them in individual learning as well as fosters self-motivation. The clinical intern uses effective classroom management techniques, physical space, and resources, all which optimize learning activities for all students. The clinical intern demonstrates the ability to use instructional time effectively to achieve learning outcomes. There is evidence that learners are actively participating engaged in lessons. In verbal and written communications, the clinical intern is warm, caring, and respectful of all learners. Please take a moment to more closely examine indicators 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and 3.4. Standard 4 addresses the clinical intern's content knowledge. In this standard, the clinical intern's lessons are well designed and demonstrate knowledge and command of the subject matter. Specifically, the clinical intern understands the central concepts, tools of inquiry, and structures of the disciplines that they teach. The intern creates learning experiences that make aspects of their discipline accessible and meaningful for learners to ensure mastery of their content. Additionally, learners in the classroom should be able to demonstrate development of critical thinking and problem solving within the content area. This shows the clinical intern's ability to impact student learning. Indicator 4.3 focuses on the clinical intern's ability to integrate reading, writing, speaking, and listening. If the intern teaches a discipline outside of the humanities, like math, science, or business, they are still expected to incorporate discipline-appropriate reading, writing, vocabulary, and discourse in their daily lesson plans and instructions. If the supervisor does not observe the intern during a lesson that involves the use of literacy skills and strategies, the intern may provide evidence of such through lesson plans created and implemented at other times during clinical practice. Now may be a good time to look at indicator 4.3 as well as indicators 4.1 and 4.2 and think about how your clinical intern might demonstrate competency in this area. Under Standard 5, clinical interns are asked to show how they use content to create opportunities for authentic interdisciplinary learning. They demonstrate connecting concepts and using differing perspectives. Clinical interns engage students in critical thinking, creativity, and collaborative problem solving related to authentic local and global issues. The clinical intern implements learning experiences that allow learners to integrate knowledge from several content areas. Learners apply their content knowledge through a variety of forms such as oral, written, and/or technological presentations. Learners are engaged in literacy activities within content areas and in activities that promote and value the development of quantitative reasoning within content areas. As discussed in Standard 4, Indicator 5.5 requires the intern to embed literacy across all content areas. If the intern teaches a discipline outside of the humanities, such as math, science, or business, they are still expected to incorporate discipline-appropriate reading, writing, vocabulary, and discourse in their daily lesson plans and instruction. If the supervisor does not observe the intern during a lesson that involves the use of literacy skills and strategies, the intern may provide evidence of such through lesson plans created and implemented at other times during clinical practice. Indicator 5.6 requires the intern to design lessons that challenge students to think critically and apply basic mathematical, statistical, and/or reasoning skills to interpret, compare data or results, draw conclusions, and/or solve problems within or across disciplines. The intern provides evidence that at some point during clinical practice, lessons have been designed to promote contextual analysis, problem solving, and informed decision making in any area or discipline. It is important to note the focus here is on the impact on student learning in the classroom, not just the skills the clinical intern demonstrates. It's how the clinical intern models these skills that enable the students to learn and apply their understanding of the content as a result. There are 6 indicators that specifically address this standard on application of content. It is the standard with the most indicators. We highly recommend taking a few minutes to become more familiar with these indicators and the areas of focus for evaluation. Assessment is the focus of Standard 6. Clinical interns must develop and use formative and summative assessments that are aligned with their learning objectives. Multiple methods should be used to assess student learning. The clinical intern is expected to use assessment to differentiate instruction, guide teacher and learner decision-making, monitor learning progress, and provide students with meaningful specific feedback. This focus on providing meaningful and specific feedback to help learners can be challenging. Long gone are the days of smiley faces, good job, and red marks indicating a loss of points. Clinical interns need to be guided in their feedback. The focus is on being able to help the student modify their decision making and improve their understanding of the material. Indicators 6.1 and 6.2 look at their ability to do so more closely. Standard 7 reflects the reality that planning instruction is a complex skill. Clinical interns must be able to select a variety of appropriate instructional materials and resources that supports the needs of all learners in meeting rigorous learning goals. The clinical intern should design and implement effective lessons that are well organized and follow a carefully sequenced development of high-level student learning. The clinical interns unit has lessons that build on each other to support learning of the essential strategy with clear connections to skills. The clinical intern draws upon knowledge of content areas, curriculum, cross-disciplinary skills, and pedagogy, as well as knowledge of learners and the community context. Technology in the lesson plans are used to support and promote learning for all learners and is effectively integrated to support student learning. The clinical intern collaborates with others from other grade level teachers, special ed teachers, ESL teachers, specialists, and community organizations to support student learning. It is important to recognize that until the clinical intern's Clinical Practice 2 semester, they have likely not focused on unit planning. Individual lessons or small group may have been the focus in previous placements and semesters. Unit planning and connecting learning, lessons, and the context for larger goals and objectives can be challenging for clinical interns. Your ability to provide guidance and feedback prior to their first attempts at unit planning will greatly benefit the intern. 4 indicators focus on planning for instruction, which indicates the complexity of the task. Standard 8 expands on the foundation of earlier standards, emphasizing the need for the clinical intern to use effective questioning strategies that promote deep understanding of content such as higher order thinking. In addition, the intern varies their role in the instructional process in relation to the content, example, instructor, facilitator, coach, or participant. The clinical intern models metacognitive processes to support comprehension of content. Students will know what they understand and why. For example, think alouds and questioning. The intern is consistently using strong strategies for metacognition, challenging students to articulate how they are learning, what they know, and modeling good learning behavior when taking on the role of a student in the classroom. The clinical intern also uses instructional time wisely throughout the lesson. The intern fosters the building of skills to apply knowledge in meaningful ways. Take a moment to look at indicators 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, and 8.4 and the criteria for each of the 4 scoring levels: advanced proficient, proficient, novice, and emergent. This will help you understand this standard and all of its intricacies. Standard 9 begins to look at a clinical intern's professional responsibility. What does professional learning and ethical practice look like? The clinical intern engages in ongoing engagement in professional learning. A professional and ethical teacher gathers evidence about their practice in order to reflect and evaluate. In particular, the clinical intern focuses on how choices made affect others. The intern also provides evidence of reflection for improvement in both content and pedagogy. The clinical intern adapts practice to meet the needs of each learner. The intern provides evidence of maintaining and analyzing accurate student records. The clinical intern exhibits appropriate personal and professional behaviors such as appropriate dress, language, and interaction with school personnel, peers, and learners. The intern demonstrates effective reading, writing, speaking, math, and technology skills skills required of a professional. Standard 10 gives a clinical intern an opportunity to collaborate with others in the school community to advance student learning and development. This goal is achieved by voluntarily offering assistance and participating in school district events, projects, and extracurricular activities. The clinical intern seeks appropriate leadership roles and opportunities. The intern collaborates with learners, families, colleagues, and other school professionals, as well as community members, to ensure learner growth and to advance the profession. Demonstration of leadership and collaboration may not be observed in actual lessons. However, the clinical intern may provide evidence and artifacts of having met the standard. Keeping in mind that every indicator must be evaluated on the final CCI, it's important to discuss at the midterm how a clinical intern could demonstrate competency in this area. The professional responsibility of Standard 11 rests on the integrity and fairness exhibited by the clinical intern, who acts in accordance with legal and ethical responsibilities. The intern works hard and uses integrity and fairness to promote the success of all learners. Most importantly, the clinical intern establishes a classroom environment which protects students against sexual, physical, verbal, or emotional harassment by acting in a sound and professionally responsible manner. When issues arise, the clinical intern acts quickly to intervene. In some cases, this standard is met because there is a sense of fairness and safety in the room. In other cases, the standard may be met because a clinical intern addressed issues outlined in this standard in a professional and ethical manner. The intern adhered to legal and ethical responsibilities expected of all classroom teachers. As with all of the standards, a clinical intern can provide evidence of having met this standard if it is not observed during lessons. This concludes our closer look at the 11 standards addressed in the CCI. At this point, please take a minute to write down any questions or concerns for which you would like to seek further clarification or may need to review more closely. The last objective of our session is to look at the post-evaluation conference and next steps in terms of following up to this presentation. We are looking at the post-observation conference after the deep dive into the CCI and its standards, because the post-evaluation conference would come after you've observed, made notes, and developed a preliminary understanding of where the clinical intern is developmentally within each standard. The goals of the post-observation conference are similar for both the midpoint conference and final conference, and should include the opportunity for the clinical internship to reflect on his or her lesson, discussion of the clinical intern's areas of growth, identification of areas where the standard was not observed, and an emphasis on strengths. Further, the focus of this meeting is on the clinical intern's reflection of their own performance over the course of the semester. At the end of clinical practice 2, each clinical intern is asked to complete a CCI self-reflection where they assess their own performance in the 11 standards of the CCI. The clinical intern's ability to accurately reflect on and represent their skills, strengths, and areas of improvement indicates that they will be able to continuously grow and learn in the profession. Your work with them on self-reflection, the lesson, the student's learning, and all areas of development during each post-observation conference is key to their ability to continue to grow and develop as an educator. Now to get into some specific logistics regarding delivery, administration, and scoring of the CCI. Cooperating teachers and clinical supervisors will receive an email with a link to the online evaluation. It is through this link that each evaluation must be submitted. Some K-12 servers may send outside emails to the spam folder, so please be sure to check that. We strongly recommend that you follow up with your intern to make sure that they received the evaluation. It is important for them to receive timely feedback to be able to improve and modify their instruction, planning, etc. for the remainder of the semester. As a result, our department policy is for evaluations to be submitted within 72 hours of the observation. If you feel you haven't received the email and link in a timely manner, please check with your clinical intern or contact the field placement office by calling 201-559-3544 or emailing the director at eaconl@felician.edu. Information pertaining to dates and submission deadlines are shared at the beginning of the semester with both cooperating teachers and clinical supervisors. They are also posted on the SOE repository. As has been discussed throughout this presentation, the clinical intern must score a 3.0 or higher on the final CCI in order to be recommended for licensure. The online evaluation system will automatically calculate the score once you reach the end of the evaluation. We have done our best to provide messages and warnings within the online evaluation tool to let you know that you will no longer be able to go back and make any grammar or scoring changes. If the final score is not a 3.0 or higher at the final, please contact the director at eaconl@felician.edu or call the Office of Field Placement at 201-559-3544. This will enhance our feedback and will enable us to follow up with these clinical interns in a supportive and meaningful way. Now that you have viewed this session, please complete the CCI training assessment, which can be found in your welcome email or in the SOE repository. You are asked to complete the short assessment in order to demonstrate your understanding and effective use of the CCI instrument. Training and assessment of clinical supervisors and cooperating teachers is a standard we must meet for our national accreditation. Thank you for helping us meet our accreditation requirements. Please contact Lauren Eakin, Director of Internships and Assessment, if you have any questions or concerns with the CCI. This concludes this training session. Thank you for taking the time to familiarize and align yourself with the implementation, use, and understanding of the CCI instrument. Please do not forget to complete the online evaluation assessment based on this session. We also want to thank you for your time and commitment to our clinical interns. Your support and dedication are integral to their success and development as the next generation of teaching professionals.